Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's, fellow Earthlings, from us at Space Times Podcast. I'm Harrison Lambert, here with Paul Mayer, excited to talk to you all about the times in space this week. For these last 7 rotations of the Earth, that includes topics on launch, communications, personnel change, and assorted business moves and technological advances. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Drop us a comment, check out our socials, and please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Launching us into the new year, we have some new updates on the launch industry. So, not just getting us to space, but getting us into 2026. We have a few unfortunate updates on Asian launch vehicles. South Korean company Innospace had their first flight of the Handbit Nano rocket on last week. It failed roughly 30 seconds into liftoff out of the Alcantara launch base in Brazil. It's an unfortunate outcome for their inaugural launch, but 30 seconds, hopefully that's enough time for them to get some valuable flight data out of that and go back to work on a redesign and improve their chances of success on their second launch. They managed to crash into a designated safety zone, so hopefully, luckily nobody got hurt. The mission did carry a few small satellites and hosted payloads for customers, so unfortunate for them as well. But Innospace will surely be added again. Unfortunately, there are a publicly traded company on the Korean Stock Exchange, so their stock did drop about a third in value. But I think they have enough funding for another launch, so it hurts in the short term, but they're not out of the game yet. This was interesting to see them launch out of the Alcantara launch base, since the Nuri rocket had recently launched out of the Naro Space Center in Gohyung, South Jeolla province in South Korea. So they do have a domestic launch base they could have used, but I think it probably had to do with the fact that they're trying to inject these customers into a sun synchronous orbit at around 500 kilometers. This capability will be valuable to South Korea, bringing to two launchers that they're capable of injecting satellites into orbit. It is the first commercial satellite launcher for South Korea, the Nuri being the recently operationalized rocket about a month ago. So crossing our fingers that they're able to get back to the launch pad soon, and that their second flight goes off successfully, and they're able to successfully, operationalize the second rocket, and hopefully this gets them closer to their plans to build out the larger lift capability rocket, since this is a small lift rocket capable of only 90 kilograms to orbit. They have a couple of rockets with larger lift capacities in the works.
Yeah, they don't call it the Handbit Nano for nothing.
They have a mini and a micro, but I always get the how small things are mixed up. So I think this is their smallest.
I think their largest capability, I think, is 500 kilograms, if that's right.
Yeah, I think it goes 90 kilograms, 200 kilograms, 500 kilograms. So all in the small lift launch vehicle range. But
I'll bet it goes nano, micro, mini. But
that's you're probably right. I thought they had the mini and the micro mixed up, but I probably have it mixed up. So,
well, if either us or they have it mixed up, who could blame us?
I think the base 10 numbers are the same in Korean as American. So, you're probably right.
All right. Well, thank you for getting us started off with the pun there. Now I'm trying to get the gears moving to keep up.
Japan didn't have much better luck. Their H3 rocket failed to deliver a navigation satellite to its intended orbit. So it is better luck, just not much better luck. The H3 rocket is an operationalized rocket, so it has launched many times before. But not getting it to orbit is unfortunate. The rocket itself seems to be fine. The second stage seems to be the part that didn't go off without a hitch. This is for their Mitsubishi 5 satellite. This is a position navigation timing satellite, part of a constellation of satellites used sort of like GPS in America or GNSS in Europe or BeiDou in China. They have 4 launched already, 7 planned in total. So hopefully this doesn't set them back too much. They'll usually, when launch failures happen, there's some time to investigate and do any sort of redesign to mitigate the chances of it happening again. So I know this is a constellation that's being actively launched. It'll be interesting to see if this causes much of a delay, or if they go over to a different launch vehicle or even a different launch provider, such as India or America, to get those satellites up there. Because these are pretty novel satellites that work kind of in tandem. This launch was into a tundra orbit, which we don't see too often. Some of these Mitsubishi satellites are in geosynchronous orbit, which are a bit more common. But regardless, these are all kind of uncommon for a PNT service. They typically, at least with GPS, typically sit in medium Earth orbit. But Geo gives them kind of a regional focus for these satellites. So they're able to boost the capability within Japan, which definitely signals that they're trying to get away from other providers, such as the GPS GNSS SPIDOW satellites. So hopefully H3 gets back to launch pad soon, and they're able to wrap up the last 3 launches of these satellites.
Yeah, so to elaborate on the, I believe, quasi-zenith satellite system, QZSS, also known as the Mitsubishi satellites. 1 through 4 are already up and operating on orbit, primarily in a combination of quasi-zenith or tundra orbits and geostationary orbits. QZSS 6 or Mitsubishi 6 went up earlier in February. That went into a geo orbit successfully. 5 was scheduled to go up last week and experienced the shutdown. That was going into a tundra orbit. And then 7 is planned for, I believe, February of 26, which is scheduled to go into a quasi-geo orbit, which I'm not familiar with that particular orbit trajectory. But 5, 6, and 7 are all relatively high power satellites. So there is a lot of novelty amongst them. So 5, 6, 7 in order, 2.4 kilowatt power budget, 2.7 kilowatt power budget, and 3.0 kilowatt power budgets, respectively. So 3 unique satellites going into 3 unique orbits, all participating in the same constellation. It's a more diversified play, I'll say, than we normally see. So interesting stuff. Wishing the team well and hoping that the QZSS is able to go up successfully on time.
Yeah, China has been having less luck than either Japan or South Korea. This it makes for the 3rd launch failure this year for their reusable spacecraft. Earlier in the year, we had the Tianlong-3 from Space Pioneer launch accidentally off of a static test stand and failed to land because it wasn't meant to launch in the first place. But when they go to launch the Tianlong-3 next year, it's planned to be a launch and land operation. So good luck to them. The Zhuke-3 from Landspace successfully launched about a month ago, but also failed to land. And just this last week, the Long March 12A, which is the reusable variant of the Long March, along with the 12B, launched, but also failed to land. These are all medium lift rockets, kind of meant to compete with the Falcon 9. But the fact that they're all struggling to get the landing part down just goes to show how difficult that part of rocket operations are. If Blue Origin's delays to achieving the same goal were no indication already, this is a very difficult task to get right.
Tangentially related to some of that launch news we have, the United Launch Alliance announced that CEO Tori Bruno has not gone to Mars, but has stepped down, surprising much of the industry. So Bruno led ULA through the post-monopoly era in national security launch and shepherded in the selection of Blue Origin's BE-4 for the Vulcan rockets. He effectively led Vulcan's developments starting in 2018 with the $1.2 billion contract awarded under National Security Secret Launch. That price point was roughly half the price point of the Atlas launch vehicle, and that was a big part of the selling point was that, hey, we're going to build this Vulcan vehicle. We're going to do so for half the cost of Atlas, and it's going to be a human-rated, translunar capable, heavy lift launch vehicle. So Bruno's resignation lands while ULA is still ramping up their Vulcan cadence after its debut earlier in 2024. The company didn't publicly discuss the reason behind Bruno's resignation or why he's pursuing another opportunity, but Tori came up in Monterey, California. He's a native of the area and graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Woo, go Mustangs.
He came up through Lockheed Martin as a structural engineer, which both Harrison and myself came up as structural engineers, not with Lockheed Martin, but a lot of similarities to Tori's background, and spent the majority of his career working at ULA. Worked up from Lockheed Martin, joined ULA, and spent 12 years with them working to compete almost pound for pound with the Falcon 9 Heavy. So the estimated launch costs today of a Falcon 9 Heavy are about 90 million. That gets you about 26.7 tons of lift out of a Falcon 9 Heavy. The launch cost for Vulcan 9's, the estimated launch cost for Vulcan 9's first two launches has been about 110 million, and that gets you about 27.2 metric tons of lift. So he set out to compete pound for pound with SpaceX and wound up doing so to the T. Went blow for blow with them. The big difference between the two is that SpaceX and their entire tech stack has been vertically integrated. United Launch Alliance was, as the name might suggest, more of an alliance that involved multiple different stakeholders, so not vertically integrated. And some of the challenges with developing such technically demanding solutions is that with multiple integrations that need to happen, there's sort of multiple points of failure. And so one of the big delays for the Vulcan vehicle can be traced back to some delays with Blue Origin's BE-4 rocket engine that they wanted to incorporate into the Vulcan because they wanted to switch off of the Russian-developed RD-180s. And so they were finally able to do this, finally able to accomplish this, and wound up getting their first successful launch in January 24, which was the Astrobotics Peregrine lander going to the moon. And then in August of 25, they launched again successfully with the USSF 106. And they also, I believe, did a third launch in October of this year, launching a mass simulation to fulfill a contract requirement. Was that this year or October of 24?
24.
October of 24. Thank you, Harrison. So after a very successful run with ULA, Tori is moving over to Blue Origin as their president of national security, and we wish him well in his current and future endeavors.
This makes a lot of sense for Tori. You know, he gets to go from being the demanding customer to being the one that's getting demanded on. But you know, luckily he has a lot of experience with the national security agencies. That was the main funder of their development. So I think that's a great addition of experience for Blue Origin. You know, their first mission of the New Glenn was for the Escapade, so it's a commercial or what is it, a civil launch for NASA. So certainly they'll be interested in doing some national security launches. You know, New Glenn's just successfully launched, so they got a long way to go. They got to get human rated if they want to start doing lunar missions or doing things like human habitats in orbit. And of course, security missions pay a lot of money. Falcon 9 launches quite a few of them. So this will extend Tori's career of competing with SpaceX, but now from the side of Blue Origin.
Yeah, to elaborate on sort of the thought process that might be going on here is that so Blue Origin and the BE-4 rocket engine have been sort of key components. Blue Origin has been the you know, in the investing side of things, we would call it as sort of like the key personnel risk or a failure point. You know, the tail wagging the dog a little bit. And so one of the potential things that Tori may be sort of looking at on a macro level and seeing is that, okay, ULA is a systems integrator at this point, integrating the engines from Blue Origin and the second stage from L3 Harris, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and seeing sort of how tough of a fight it has been against SpaceX and seeing the vast amount of success that Blue Origin has received, the writing on the wall could be telling Tori very much that the direction the industry is going to be more vertically integrated launch providers, and Blue Origin would be better suited potentially to tackle that and vertically integrate all of the launch capability to compete pound for pound with SpaceX, rather than a systems integrator like ULA, who would have to partner with different players at each sort of horizontal layer in the stack. So that could potentially be sort of where the thought process is in going to join Blue Origin, having just worked with them, having just verified and validated the quality of the BE4 engine and knowing exactly how important that is to the success of their launch capabilities. I wouldn't consider it at all a long leap to put some expectations on Blue Origin, looking at increasing their launch capacity, looking at increasing their lift capacity, and looking at trying to get more into the medium and heavy lift capabilities with Tori's leadership on staff.
Yeah, New Glenn is bigger than the Centaur, or the Vulcan, but it's in the same kind of class as the Vulcan, the Falcon Heavy. I know they have a larger lift capacity variant planned for the near future. So, hopefully he gets to continue building cool stuff there.
Another major personnel change is the confirmation of Jared Isaacman as director of NASA. There were a small handful of senators who changed positions between his first nomination and the second nomination, which is what allowed him to get through and get confirmed himself. It indicates a little bit of sort of timing pressure here that there is, in line with the Redshift article that we discussed earlier. There are some major space priorities and some major space, I'll say, risks for American leadership in the domain. And some of the executive orders that have prioritized and focused on space that have come out of the administration have very much fallen in line with that same goal of maintaining American space dominance, maintaining American space leadership, and Isaacman's confirmation and public appearances have very much echoed those same sentiments. I believe the quote is something to the effect of American leadership in the high ground of space, and that Isaacman has very publicly supported both the ongoing Artemis programs and government contracting business models as methods to continue to grow America's space presence and influence.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
It's going to be an interesting time for him to join in. I know, a lot of the focus has been on the lunar economy, and a lot of the plans he's laying out are to return to the moon in the next 5-10 years, which is very aggressive. Granted, we've been working towards it pretty steadily over the past years, primarily around the Artemis project. But as we just talked about with the ULA, the Vulcan is translunar capable. The New Glenn is built, with the moon in mind, and Starship, having successfully launched and landed, is gearing up to work on some of the development that it needs to for its lunar lander program. So, there's a lot of momentum behind this effort that's going to be a tailwind for Isaacman coming in. But certainly plenty of challenges left. Our lunar lander program definitely needs some attention. It's been kind of hit and miss between all the players like Astrobotic, Intuitive Machines. SpaceX expressed concern about their roadmap, last month. So some focus needs to be done there. There's the NASA safety panel talking about some of the risks to the overall Artemis plan. That includes things such as the station, the lunar orbiting station, that includes components from several major contractors to build out, things like the crewed habitat, the power element. We had talked about that recently with Intuitive Machines buying Lanteris. They now own parts of Artemis mission, including the lunar lander and the power and propulsion element of the lunar orbiting habitat. So there's going to need to be some attention to a lot of these components. And I found particularly the nuclear reactor component interesting, that there is a clear goal set for 2030 to have a nuclear reactor on the moon. Well, Russia is saying similar things, but setting a timeline of 2036. And we're seeing a lot of funding going towards nuclear companies very recently. Again, sort of adjacent to Intuitive Machines, X Energy got 300 million in funding a couple of weeks ago, and that's run by the same person as Intuitive Machines. So a very cohesive strategy for lunar settlements from the commercial side of the US space industry. But there's also a lot of funding going to companies that aren't explicitly targeting the moon, but have kept it open as an option, such as Antares recently got its funding. So it'll be interesting to see how fast we can move with nuclear reactor. There's not just the technical hurdles, but also the policy hurdles and just public opinion. It's very challenging to overcome with this kind of technology.
Yeah, some of Isaacman's stated goals are to have a permanent presence on the moon by the end of the current administration, and a key milestone in accomplishing that is, or a key milestone that will shortly follow that accomplishment, is the nuclear reactor on the moon by 2030. I think the development of orbital nuclear technology has been largely buoyed by the prospect and need of orbital data centers, and that has been viewed as sort of a potential solution for that need case there. So whether or not you buy into or believe in the viability of orbital data centers, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone into this. And we've only heard in the past week that the quote unquote the lunar economy is a priority of the US government. We've only heard that explicitly stated in the past week. So the typical trend is that commercial money follows government signals. And so most of the government signals that we've seen earlier in the year and in the early half or the latter part of 2024 have been around improved intelligence for warfighters, have been around getting them actionable intel on a faster cycle time and in closer to real-time intelligence, rather than in images and intelligence with a 36-hour delay, with a 36-minute delay. And so I guess the point of this is that there has already been growth towards this massive infrastructure layer in orbit to serve some of the AI bubble, for lack of a better term, to serve some of the AI hype. Whether or not the business or physics case for orbital data centers winds up closing satisfactorily, we'll round up and say about $500 million that have been invested directly or indirectly in that layer of the industry. And there's a huge overlap. The Venn diagram it's not coincident, it's not a single circle, but it's got 50% overlap, 70% overlap, pretty sizable shared technology needs with permanent lunar habitats and permanent lunar habitation modules.
Well,
so
and
there's a huge head start that that industry has already gotten through some of the investment that we've seen.
Well, and you're making a connection that we talked about recently as well, which is last week, the 4IG investment of $100 million into Innospace is yet another company that's owned by the same person as Intuitive Machines and X Energy. So there's this just huge connective tissue going between just this one group of companies, but I think it signals the larger effort of the US. I mean, when they invested 100 million, there was kind of an express interest of using Axiom Space's habitats as orbital data centers, which to me, like, it keeps coming up, and it's kind of to me, it's always been kind of weird that orbital habitats is one of the kind of companies that would be pursuing orbital data centers, but it does make some sense. Like, they are climate controlled units in orbit, and those are the kind of situations we know how to run computers in the best. Like, ISS is really the only one that's running, compute at any sort of scale on orbit currently. And so the closest thing to that would be a space habitat. So,
Sure.
there is a potential kind of head start that these sort of businesses have in approaching this problem. I don't think they scale the same way as a lot of these other companies are talking about, with kind of more traditional satellites and their heating and solar power systems. But it's definitely interesting that Cam Ghaffarian and Intuitive Machines, Axiom Space, X Energy, they all play together so nicely when it comes to lunar efforts, on-orbit data center efforts. All of this Artemis project, all of this ties together so well with all the businesses and all the money he's pulling in for them.
Yeah, I would not at all be surprised to see multiple companies in 2026 land sizable hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts. I would not be surprised to see multiple companies land contracts of that scale that pertain to lunar infrastructure and lunar habitats. One of the explicit goals of the Isaacman led of Isaacman's NASA is to grow and establish the lunar economy. And so, given that Isaacman has explicitly supported the government contracting model, despite some of the concerns that the safety board has raised about the viability of the government contracting model for more developmental efforts for effectively higher risk, non-profit, unprofitable missions. Um, it'll be interesting to see sort of how that winds up playing. And effectively, the stated support of the Artemis program and the stated support of government contracting businesses is that that safety panel review of the Artemis program is going to be a really quick and really easy sort of litmus test as to Isaacman's leadership to see, okay, both of these are important. Which one of these is more important? How do we want to prioritize as we move forward? So excited to see the direction that NASA takes in 2026. And for Isaacman, we absolutely wish him luck.
So, adding to the launch vehicle news, we have the LVM3 rocket launching AST Space Mobile's next generation direct-to-device Bluebird 6 tranche of satellites. This is a rocket. This is the heaviest lift for this rocket. This is ISRO's LVM3 rocket. It's launched many times in the past, but this is what they're claiming is the heaviest payload at 6,100 kilograms, being launched into low Earth orbit. It contains a dozen Bluebird satellites. These are large communication satellites that deploy a 2,400 square foot phased array antenna to provide direct-to-device cell services. This is a follow-on for AST Space Mobile to their Blue Walker 3 and Bluebird 1 through 5 satellites, which had set the previous record for the largest communication arrays deployed in low Earth orbit. So 2,400 square feet, huge satellite. It's an impressive feat if those all work. Each satellite is very capable on its own, though, so I think they have some margin for some error there. Although I'm sure their stock would hate to see it after taking that hit last week from the sell-off. But these are very impressive satellites. They are capable of 120 megabits per second downlink, uplink. They have about 2,000 plus active cells per satellite, and so they can serve millions of activities per day across their entire constellation. This is a big step for AST Space Mobile in terms of operationalizing direct to device. It should start bringing them some significant revenue It helps them compete significantly with other players like Starlink and OneWeb.
Yeah, to be frank, I don't understand how their stock price is dipping or lowering after the successful launch of this, because they've effectively beat everybody that we think is going to wind up being one of the key players in the market. They're effectively first to market with D2D capabilities. So like huge accomplishment on their end. And the dip in stock price doesn't quite pass the smell test. So not entirely sure what maybe there's like some information that we're missing or that we've missed, and that
Maybe
folks trading and selling the stock price are more pertinent to than we are. But
it's all these
investors,
paper hands trading on the meme stock.
maybe
They had that like 4 times boost at the beginning of the year where they just went to the moon, even though they're only supposed to go to Leo. So maybe it's a correction. Once actual once it's not just paper calculation, they're actually on orbit and seeing what they're actually capable of. Maybe it's just a reality check as to the scale of what they're able to accomplish right now.
that's entirely possible. That's entirely possible, but
But I mean, if this is the first launch of this generation of satellites, so I'm hoping everything goes great and they're able to just keep launching these. It is an expensive launch; it's 50 million, not crazy expensive. ISRO is known for some of their cheaper launches, and I think like a Falcon 9 fully loaded is about 70 million. So they could have maybe got a couple more satellites up there, but it's a pretty economical launch for them. It's still a lot of money, so these things need to be making back that cost. But hopefully, if everything goes well, they can just start churning these out. As I think they need many more than a dozen to fill out their constellation.
right, right. Either way, massive accomplishment for Space Mobile. So congratulations to them.
On a similar note, OQ Technology has demonstrated end-to-end IoT connection with Nordic Semiconductor's cellular IoT chip. So this IoT chip is similar to like a cell phone device. It is able to plug into LTE and 5G networks, but it's operating at kind of a lower throughput than a standard cell phone. So it's primarily used for IoT devices, which are more so for business cases. So think tracking in mining, agriculture, asset tracking. We talked a little bit about last week when BAE Labs got an award for their oversight program of asset tracking, Earth asset tracking from orbit. But there's lots of companies that are pursuing this sort of IoT technology from orbit, such as Hubble Networks, Satell IoT, Lacuna Space. There's many more to name that are all making good progress on this capability. There is some real value to be had here, although it is sort of a competition with direct-to-device constellations, like we've talked about with AST, with OneWeb, with Starlink. It'll be interesting to see how they're able to differentiate themselves against these larger networks. I think in this case, it's their partnership with Nordic Semiconductor that helps. The chip on the ground that's able to do a very particular task, such as this low power application, does set them apart from the ground side of things. But on orbit, the kind of satellites that OQ Technologies would be building would have to be able to differentiate based on revisit rate, like total low latency, the cost of their service. So uh, IoT technology has been kind of a start and stop application in space. It'll be interesting to see how that develops for the direct-to-device industry as it matures in the coming years, and if there's any value to be had there that can support its own business case and associated satellite network. SDA's Tranche Zero recently launched. We talked about it a month ago when they launched 18 satellites for York Space and 18 satellites for Terran Orbital. So this is a communication layer of the proliferated warfighter space architecture. But within about a month, they're able to show success of one of the key technologies of these satellites, which is the optical space to ground communication. They only claimed it with York Space LLC, and for some reason, SpaceX satellite vehicles, which I was not aware that Starshield was part of this tranche. They had previously announced Terran orbital, um, but either Terran didn't have these or Starshield was just a different component in this tranche. Um, but it's interesting news to hear. One, because optical space to ground is one of the least utilized kind of vectors for optical communication. We've been talking a lot about space to space for this sort of technology. We've had some recent news out of China of like geo to ground laser communication, so it has been done, and it's certainly been done in the U.S. as well. Kepler did a space to air communication. The U.S. did a ground to Psyche, which was like way past geo, deep space mission. So we've got lasers flying all over the place. With this particular tranche, it's meant to be a communication layer between missile detection satellites on orbit and missile interception systems on the ground. So it's great to hear that this technology is up and running. It's, one, good for Starshield, who's already had massive success in the defense industry, but also interesting news for York Space, and kind of off of that, good news for Mynaric, who is the optical terminal provider for York Space, but they are also a company that's being actively pursued for acquisition by Rocket Lab. And we talked about Rocket Lab last week. They're in tranche 3 of the Proliferated Warfighter Network, whereas York Space isn't. They're only in tranche 0. So it's interesting that Rocket Lab is kind of profiting off of all these other tranches and other players that they're actually competing with directly for the contract, but they're making money off of these subcomponents. I think their goal is to make money off this Mynaric subsystem that a lot of other players besides Starlink have to use or choose to use, as well as that Starlight direct laser defense system that we talked about last week. So Rocket Lab making very interesting moves, and we'll see how this plays out off tranche 0. But for now, great. Congratulations to York Space and SpaceX for their successful demonstration of PWSA tranche 0.
Well, in addition to those major communications updates, there's a handful of big updates elsewhere in sort of the business space. The biggest of which, by sheer magnitude, is the CACI International, CACI International, buying optical communication and space sensing company ARCA for $2.6 billion. This is an all-cash transaction with funds managed by the Blackstone Technical Operations Group, or Blackstone, colloquially known. So CACI International, CACI, not like the pants, is a national security firm acquiring ARCA's space-based sensor portfolio and ground-based data processing capabilities to supplement their national security solutions offerings. Effectively, what they're trying to do is accelerate the delivery of actionable intelligence provided to the warfighters. Like we spoke about earlier, they are trying to rapidly shorten that cycle time. That was one of the major priorities expressed at GeoInt in St. Louis over the summer. And if CACI believes that acquiring ARCA will improve their intelligence delivery timeline, that alone warrants the acquisition. So their stock is up roughly 30% on the year, and they're down about 10% from their November peak. But on the back of this announcement, their stock price held relatively stable. So that's relatively indicative that this company has been growing. It's been growing rapidly, and they went ahead and made a major acquisition that they think will help them sustain that level of growth, and that they haven't necessarily seen any benefits that have been derived from that acquisition yet. So nothing major either way to be gleaned from the stock price, but massive deal, massive signal validating the statement that, that government signal, hey, this is what we need, led to some major commercial investments, some major commercial action within 6 months in that same vein. Additionally, Starfighter's Space went public. They offered an IPO and also I think simultaneously raised a little bit of capital, totaling, I believe, 40 million to accelerate the development of their supersonic aircraft capable of suborbital launches. So Starfighter Space is a fleet of 7 different F-104s based out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. And they launch their F-104s, get up to their cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, and then launch a ramjet into suborbital altitudes and deploy satellites therefrom. If Starfighter sounds familiar, you might be thinking of the alleged name or title dubbed to the first fighter to shoot down a satellite in an F-15 back in the 80s. And that's basically what they're doing. Rather than shooting down targets, they're putting more assets up on orbit, but they're doing so with the F-104 as the first stage of launch.
They
So
might accidentally shoot down a satellite.
I,
Couldn't put it past them.
hey, they're in Florida. What do you want?
Not, is it Florida? I saw Texas.
I saw
Either way.
I saw Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral.
Why? Isn't the whole point you don't have to launch out of there? Either way, it sounds exactly the kind of place that would buy 7 jets and take a company public.
They're going to be a fun one to watch. I don't know whether I'd be. There's definitely going to be some numbers that grow. I don't know whether that will be legal bills or revenues, but there's going to be numbers that grow. Additionally, most technically impressive was that Redwire was selected by the exploration company to provide a couple of IBDMs, which has nothing to do with the gastrointestinal system, but stands for International Birthing and Docking Mechanisms. So the exploration company is building the human-rated crewed NIX spacecraft, and they represent sort of Europe's first sovereign play in human-rated flight. Currently, to get any sort of capsule up to the ISS, they have to partner with NASA or Roscosmos to do so on the Falcon, on the Boeing, or on the they have to use the Dragonfly, the Boeing Starliner, or the Soyuz Roscosmos capsule. So this is Europe's, the ESA's first sovereign human-rated launch capability or human-rated flight capsule capability, and they are contracting out the birthing and docking mechanisms to Redwire, a multi-million, multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate of a company. And so major step towards Europe's commercial sovereignty around human-rated flight, vertically integrating all of those capabilities to within the EU. And this is on the back of the exploration company winning about $700 million in contracts from VAST, Axiom, and Starlab, and an additional 70 million from government contractors throughout Europe to date, or government contracts throughout Europe to date. They continue to execute on this stated goal, despite some of the examples of pork barreling that we've pointed to previously, despite some of the, well, as the representative of Italy, I want this money to go to factories in my nation. Well, as the representative from France, I want this money to go to factories and companies in my nation, et cetera, et cetera. I want this money in my backyard, effectively. So despite some of those challenges, the ESA's goal for sovereign launch and space capability has been very successful, and it continues to be so. So as long as the NIX spacecraft's demonstration mission doesn't slip out past 2031, it's currently scheduled for 2028. So long as that doesn't slip out past 2031, they are well on their way to demonstrating capabilities with the ISS.
Yeah, I think that they have very little margin for error with these timelines and numbers, which is a little concerning. The fact that it's an 8-figure contract with Redwire when they really only have the contracts they have, much of them aren't collectible until they've actually performed something. Like it looks like the 70 million from government contracts is maybe the only one that they can collect anytime soon. So, the amount of cash they have compared to the amount of money that's to spend to develop their technology is pretty close. And the fact that they're trying to launch by 2020, well, that the docking systems are supposed to support a demonstration by 2028. That's a pretty short lead time for a pretty complicated technology. Granted, it's fairly well developed, so I don't think Redwire will have much problem delivering. But if they slip much further out than 2028, they could be missing the ISS window to use that. And then they're counting on VAST and Axiom and Starlab being up and running by then. Which it's good that they have contracts with all of them, so at least just one of them has to make it through for them to have a customer. But I'm sure those companies have contracts with other crew and cargo suppliers like Cygnus from Northrop uh, or Dragon from SpaceX, or potentially Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser now that it's no longer a uh, crewed space plane. So
Sure. One of the big differences between a contract and an LOI or an MOU is that it is effectively binding. So even though, to your point, none of these, even though they've been awarded $770 million in contracts, but they've only been able to collect on, number from a hat, we'll say 30 million. They've only been able to collect so far we'll just say half of the government contracts that they've received. So 35 million. Even though that 700 million is still uncollectible, it's a much higher quality revenue signal. It's not yet revenue, but it's much higher quality not yet revenue than anything else possible on the market. So point being that until the folks who hold those contracts either go bankrupt or cancel those contracts, they will be able to leverage those contracts pretty favorably for other funding opportunities if necessary.
yeah,
And so even though the contracts are only set to sort of pay out in any capacity upon delivery of capability, um, that's it's still reasonable to believe that the exploration company is effectively well backed and isn't likely to go bankrupt. So even if there's a slippage, and even if they wind up missing the ISS and the ISS gets decommissioned and they're not fully up and operating by the time the ISS rolls around, by the time that gets decommissioned in 2031, um, there's there's a lot of reason to believe that they've effectively already been king made by the major
yeah,
space habitat providers, and that even if those space habitat providers have contracts with other folks, I mean, Boeing is still very much around
yeah.
because they have those contracts, even if they've been underperforming those contracts, right? Like, but the Starliner is still there, even if it's not in use and even if it's been downgraded a little bit.
You mean
Uh,
it's still in orbit? What do you mean it's still there?
no, yeah, they never got it back. It's still up there somewhere.
It's just floating around. Yeah, and I agree. Like, I think it's king made, but primarily just because Europe needs their own capability, and this seems like they're a front runner to deliver that. So I
Absolutely.
think they're going to let them fail.
Yeah.
And I think just it's going to depend how easy it is for them to get the technology demonstrated, depending on how these space habitats phase in and out
Yeah.
as the ISS closes up shop.
Jokes about Starliner aside, the exploration company is, despite despite a lot of their revenues being unearned, despite over 90% of their contracts and revenues being unearned, they're still well positioned.
Normally, I get to cover our tech advances this week. There, because it's the holidays, there's not much news coming out, but we did have one tech disadvance, de-advance. Unfortunately, the NASA Escapade spacecraft experienced a lower than expected thrust during a trajectory correction maneuver. So this means that the spacecraft wasn't able to correct its trajectory on its way to Mars. This pair of spacecraft for Escapade Blue and Gold was launched last month by the New Glenn. Too much fanfare by me. I was very excited to see these spacecraft head to Mars because these were considered cheap Mars orbiters at a measly $55 million for the pair of them. They are going to go measure some Martian activity, atmospheric activity, help us learn more about the planet that we are hoping to inhabit soon. Um, the good news out of this is that the setback delay shouldn't impact the eventual arrival of the spacecraft, and the other spacecraft was able to make its transfer burn. So mission's still on. I'm still excited to hear when they arrive at Mars. This is just a minor setback, which NASA is no stranger to, but I am sure they will sort things out. Well, that will do it for this week's episode of the Space Times podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, please drop us a comment, check out our socials, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Until next time, this is Harrison Lambert and Paul Mayer signing off for now.